The wind at the top of the ridge cut across my face, sharp and clean. The kind of air that should have felt refreshing, but instead sent a chill straight into my bones. I remember my husband Robert standing beside me, his breathing heavy from the climb. We had been told this day was meant to be a celebration, a little anniversary hike. A gift from our son and his wife. 40 years of marriage honored with laughter, photographs, and mountain views. That was the promise. But the ground beneath us told another story. Loose gravel shifted with every step as we edged closer to the cliff. My hand clung to Robert's, squeezing harder than I ever had before. His warmth was steady, but I could sense his hesitation. Deep down, I shared it. Still, when it came to my son, I wanted so badly to trust. A mother's heart doesn't surrender that easily. Behind us, their voices urged us forward. I tried to take comfort in their words, but there was something sharp in their tone, something I had ignored too many times before. I told myself not to be paranoid. I told myself that family doesn't betray family. The valley stretched out below, endless and breathtaking, like the world itself was holding its breath. For one fragile moment, I felt suspended between awe and dread. Then it happened. A sudden weight pressed hard against my back. Not gentle, not accidental, deliberate. My body lurched forward, the ground slipping away beneath me. My heart leapt into my throat as the sky swallowed my vision. I heard Robert's body hit before I registered my own fall. The sound of bone and stone colliding cracked through the air. My lungs burned, my chest seized, and pain scattered through me like fire. The world spun into chaos, yet one truth cut through it all. My own son had tried to end my life. As my body crashed against the rocks, time seemed to fold in on itself. All the moments of motherhood, his first steps, his quiet childhood glances, my whispered prayers flashed behind my eyes, twisted now into a betrayal I could barely comprehend. And as I lay broken at the bottom, with the echo of the shove still alive in my memory, a question carved itself deep into my soul. How had we reached this point? To answer that, I have to take you back to the days before suspicion, before shadows crept into our home, when life still felt simple and safe. That is where this story truly begins. There was a time when life felt steady, almost ordinary in its beauty. Robert and I built a simple home in a quiet town where days blended together in the best way, mornings filled with the smell of fresh coffee, evenings with the creak of the porch swing under our weight as we talked about the future. My world was small, but it was enough. Our two boys filled the house with energy in very different ways. Daniel, our firstborn, seemed to carry sunlight in his chest. He laughed easily, and when he laughed, the whole house felt alive. He had a quick mind and even quicker dreams, talking endlessly about the bridges he wanted to design, the buildings he hoped would stand long after he was gone. I remember watching him lean over Robert's workbench, measuring pieces of wood as if even a scrap could become part of something greater. Nathan, our younger son, was a different story. He was quiet, withdrawn, content to sit in the corner with a book or wander the backyard lost in his own thoughts. He didn't chase attention, and sometimes his silences stretched so long, I wondered what he carried inside. Still, I loved him with the same fierceness. I told myself that some children simply blossom later, and that patience would show me his gifts in time. Our Sundays were my favorite. After church, we gathered around the oak table Robert had built with his own hands. Daniel would speak with the confidence of someone twice his age, painting pictures of the future with every word, while Nathan poked at his food quietly, a shadow beside his brother's brightness. I tried not to worry, convincing myself that his quiet was simply part of who he was. Evenings often ended with Robert and me walking the trail near our home, talking about the years ahead, retirement, grandchildren, maybe finally seeing the ocean together. I thought those walks were nothing more than a way to stay healthy, but now I see them differently. They were practice for endurance, for holding each other up when the ground beneath us would later give way. Back then, I believed our life was untouched by tragedy. But even in those golden days, shadows were already forming just beyond my sight. The night Daniel didn't come home is etched into me like a scar that never fades. At first, I told myself not to worry. Maybe he was caught up studying. Maybe he had gone out with friends. But as the hours stretched, unease settled in my stomach like a stone. By midnight, that unease turned to panic. I remember pacing the kitchen floor, the ticking of the clock echoing louder with each passing minute. Robert and a few neighbors went searching through town, their flashlights sweeping across fields and trails, while I stood at the window, straining to see some sign of my boy. The knock at dawn broke me. His body had been found at the bottom of a gorge just outside town. They said he must have slipped, that it was a tragic accident. I couldn't take in the words. My Daniel, the boy with the laugh that could brighten the darkest room, the boy who carried dreams bigger than his years, was gone in an instant. The funeral was the darkest day of my life. I wore the same black dress I had worn to my mother's funeral, but this grief was heavier, unbearable. My legs buckled beneath me more than once, and Robert's arms kept me from collapsing completely. I sobbed until my body had nothing left to give, until silence replaced tears. But what cut deepest was Nathan. My younger son sat stone-faced, his eyes dry, his expression unreadable. Not a single tear fell for the brother he had grown up with. At the time, I told myself everyone grieves differently, that his quietness was his way of surviving the pain. Still, a chill crept into my heart every time I looked at him that day. And yet, in the weeks that followed, Nathan changed. The boy who had always been withdrawn suddenly became attentive. He carried groceries for me, offered to help with chores, even sat in Robert's workshop as if he wanted to learn. I told myself this was his way of stepping up, of honoring Daniel's memory by filling the gap his brother left behind. I clung to that belief because I had to. I had already buried one child, and I couldn't face the thought of losing another, not in body, not in spirit. So I wrapped my arms tighter around Nathan, convincing myself that at least I still had him, never realizing I was holding on to the very source of my undoing. What felt like healing was only a mask, and soon that mask would shape the course of our lives. After Daniel's death, Nathan seemed to slip into a new role almost overnight. The boy who had once been withdrawn and quiet suddenly became the one I leaned on. He offered to mow the lawn before Robert could ask, carried groceries without complaint, and sat across the table listening as if my words mattered. It was as though he had taken Daniel's absence as a challenge to step up, to prove himself. And in my grief, I welcomed it. I wanted so badly to believe that the son I had left was becoming the man I could rely on. Time passed, and Nathan's life unfolded in ways that seemed ordinary, even admirable. He met Samantha, a woman whose smile could light up a room, and before long, they married. I remember their wedding day, how proud I felt watching Nathan at the altar, his hand wrapped around hers. Soon, children followed. Grandchildren filled our home with laughter, sticky fingers reaching for cookies, tiny voices calling me grandma. For a while, I told myself this was healing. The empty chair at the table remained, but life had not stopped. It had found a way forward. Still, there were moments that unsettled me. Nathan's eyes, when he thought no one was looking, seemed to harden in ways I couldn't explain. His kindness sometimes carried an edge, a persistence that left me uneasy. If I hesitated at a decision, he pushed just a little too firmly. I brushed it aside as eagerness, convincing myself he only wanted what was best. Samantha was different. She carried warmth and gentleness, the kind that made me want to trust her without question. I often wondered if she noticed the same shadows I did in Nathan, or if love had blinded her the way grief had blinded me. As the years went on, conversations around the dinner table began to shift. Nathan and Samantha spoke more often about the future, about retirement, about whether Robert and I should consider downsizing. They hinted at the house being too much for us, the expenses unnecessary. The word inheritance slipped in one evening, casual but heavy, hanging in the air longer than it should have. That was when the warmth I had wrapped around myself began to thin. I wanted to believe in the perfect family Nathan had built, but unease was no longer something I could ignore. And soon, the cracks in his mask would begin to show. It started with something small, an old photograph that slipped out of a drawer while I was cleaning. Daniel's face smiled back at me, alive and full of light. But what caught my eye wasn't him. It was Nathan, standing just behind him. His eyes weren't on the camera. They were locked on his brother with a look I couldn't quite place. Envy? Maybe? Resentment. At the time, I had brushed it off. Brothers bicker, brothers compete. But now, years later, that look unsettled me in a way I couldn't ignore. Once the thought entered my mind, other fragments of memory began to surface. The night Daniel never came home. How Nathan had been the only one who seemed calm while I was unraveling. I remembered the way he sat at the funeral, stiff and dry-eyed, almost detached, as though he were watching a play rather than mourning his brother. Even then, I told myself everyone grieves differently. I wanted so desperately to believe that, but the cracks widened with every recollection. Daniel had been excited about something the day he died. He had spoken about an opportunity, a project that might have taken him out of town. Could Nathan have felt threatened by that? My mind replayed the weeks before Daniel's death, moments when Nathan had watched his brother with an intensity I hadn't wanted to see. The heaviest blow came when I remembered the search. Robert and the neighbors combed the woods that night, their flashlights cutting through the dark. But Nathan lingered behind. He didn't call out Daniel's name, didn't strain his voice with desperation like the rest of us. He stood silently, watching, as though he already knew the outcome. At the time, I thought it was shock. Now, I wondered if it was certainty. The realization struck me not as a single thunderclap, but as a slow, suffocating storm. My son, my only living son, had not just stepped into his brother's place. He had created the space himself. The thought tore through me, violent and unbearable. Love screamed at me to reject it, to deny it, to protect the child who remained. But truth whispered louder, and truth was merciless. I collapsed into myself, caught between rage and heartbreak. How could a mother reconcile that the child she nurtured, the boy she once held against her chest, could be the architect of her other son's death? My heart begged for ignorance, but my soul knew better. For years, I had clung to Nathan as my lifeline, believing he was my second chance at motherhood, at family. But the truth had been there all along, and I had blinded myself to it. Now, every smile, every gesture of kindness, every moment of supposed devotion felt poisoned. The mask was beginning to slip, and I finally saw what lay beneath. And with that knowledge, I understood Daniel's death was not the end. It was the beginning of a much darker story. I began to notice the shift in Nathan slowly, like shadows creeping across a room at dusk. After Daniel's death, he had played the role of the dutiful son so well that I clung to it, needing to believe in his devotion. But as the years stretched on, the warmth in his gestures gave way to something sharper. His voice carried more weight in conversations. His suggestions carried an edge of command. And suddenly, the balance in our family began tilting in ways I could no longer ignore. At first, it seemed harmless. He started speaking about the future with an almost obsessive focus, framing it as concern for us. He wanted Robert and me to think about downsizing, to consider assisted living, to put our affairs in order. Samantha sat beside him, her smile as polished as ever, always chiming in with words that sounded sweet, but left a chill in my chest. She would touch my hand gently, as if she were reassuring me. But behind her eyes, I sensed calculation. The pressure grew heavier with each visit. What began as occasional comments soon became pointed reminders. I remember standing in the kitchen while Nathan inspected the cabinets, remarking that the upkeep must be exhausting for us at our age. Samantha, gliding through the living room, spoke of how practical it would be to sell while the market was strong. Their words wrapped themselves around me like vines, tightening with each passing week. Robert, ever practical, saw reason in their arguments. He told me Nathan only wanted to help, that letting him handle our finances would ease our burden. But in the quiet of the night, when I lay awake listening to the ticking of the clock, I felt the weight of unease pressing down. I remembered the flicker in Nathan's eyes, the same flicker I had ignored when Daniel died. Love made me want to dismiss it. Fear told me I could not. The home that had once been our sanctuary, where laughter once echoed, where Daniel's voice once carried through the halls, now felt like contested ground. Each suggestion from Nathan, each soft insistence from Samantha, chipped away at the safety I had always felt within those walls. I began to see the truth I had tried so hard not to face. They weren't simply planning for our future. They were preparing to take control. And as I stood in the heart of my own home, I realized it no longer belonged to me. It had become a battlefield. The stage was set, though I could not yet see how far Nathan was willing to go. That realization would come later, on the mountain's edge. The cliff looked different that day. Maybe it was the way the clouds hung low, heavy and gray. Or maybe it was the way the wind seemed to push us closer to the edge with every gust. Robert squeezed my hand, and I told myself this was meant to be a celebration, an anniversary hike, a moment of peace after so many storms. Nathan and Samantha had arranged it, said it would be good for us. A gift. A memory. But even as we started up the trail, I felt a knot in my stomach that I could not untangle. Nathan walked ahead, his stride confident, too assured. Samantha kept close to me, her voice warm, almost soothing, but her eyes darted forward, always toward Nathan. There was something rehearsed in the way they moved, like dancers following a script I didn't yet understand. Still, I told myself not to doubt. He was my son. He had carried me through grief before, hadn't he? Surely, I was imagining shadows where none existed. The closer we came to the cliff's edge, the louder my unease grew. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, sharp and brittle, and every step sounded like a warning. Robert tightened his grip again, steadying me. I caught Nathan looking back, his eyes flickering with something I had seen once before on the day Daniel didn't come home. It was the same cool detachment, the same emptiness. My heart stuttered, and yet I pushed the thought away. Love has a way of silencing reason. When we reached the top, the world opened before us, rolling hills, endless sky, a beauty so vast it felt cruel. Samantha placed her hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm, guiding me closer to the edge. Nathan stood behind us, his voice calm, almost too calm. In that instant, every puzzle piece I had ignored clicked into place. The inheritance talks, the pressure about the house, the mask he wore so perfectly after Daniel's death. The air grew cold against my skin as Robert and I exchanged a glance, silent, knowing, terrified. Then I felt it, a force at my back, sudden and merciless. Nathan's hands. The world tilted, the ground vanished, and my body lurched into empty space. As the wind roared past my ears, time stretched. I thought of Daniel's laugh, of Robert's steady love, of the countless dinners and ordinary nights that had once defined my life. And then I thought of Nathan, my surviving son, the child I clung to after loss, the boy I believed had saved me. How blind I had been. The cliff receded above me, and betrayal wrapped itself tighter than gravity ever could. In the free fall, sorrow and acceptance fused into one truth. Love had blinded me, and it had delivered me here. And as the ground rushed up to meet me, I understood that this was not just the end of a story, but the beginning of a truth I could no longer deny. As I fell, time unraveled. The wind rushed past my ears, but my thoughts were louder. It was not just the sound of betrayal that filled me. It was the echo of all the moments I had chosen not to see. Love had been my shield, but it had also been my blindfold. And now, with the ground racing toward me, I realized that blindness can cost everything. I think back on the years when laughter filled our home, when my boys were small, when Robert's steady hand always held mine. Those moments were real. They were not erased by the darkness that came later. But I see now how trust, when placed in the wrong hands, can become a weapon. I wanted to believe Nathan's every smile, his every promise. I wanted to believe he was my redemption after Daniel was gone, and that want, that desperate hope, became my undoing. What do we learn when the people closest to us betray us? I suppose the lesson is not to close your heart, but to open your eyes, to pay attention to the unease, the patterns, the shadows at the edges of love. I silenced my instincts because I thought suspicion was unkind, because I thought mothers were meant to forgive before they questioned. But silence has a price. If you are listening to this now, I want you to hold your loved ones close, but I want you to look honestly at them too. Love them deeply, but do not ignore the signs that whisper something is wrong. Protect your heart. Yes, but protect your life as well. The cliff took my body, but my voice remains, not to haunt, but to remind. Trust is precious, fragile, and it should never be handed over blindly, even to the ones you believe could never hurt you. I leave you with this: cherish the people who prove their love through kindness, not control. Honor the memories, but don't let them blind you to the truth in front of you. And if my story has touched you, if it has made you pause and reflect, then share it. Tell it forward, because none of us are as safe as we think. And sometimes, the greatest danger comes from within the family we love most.